This is the reread podcast for the Tale of Edgar Trunk, with some spoilers and possible light spoilers for books 2 and 3. This is for those of you who have read the series or are new to the series. Maybe some of you are Edgar Trunk curious. I think this is a good place to get exposure and introduction. We're 3 books in now. And over the course of this podcast, we're going right back to the beginning, a couple chapters at a time, with some analysis, some story, and a lot of it will be really fun and exciting, even for me, Jason Silva. I'm the author of the series, and I have with me...
I am Annette Silva. Hi. Can I just say, babe, I'm so proud of you for writing this series. You just finished book 3 last summer, and I read book 1 for the first time over 10 years ago when you had recently published it. And then I read it again years later. Then I read it a third time when you started writing book 3, and now I'm reading it for the 4th time. And every time I read it, new things pop out, and I have more of an appreciation for the story and the characters and for your writing. So I'm so excited to dig into this again.
I am feeling a lot of the same things, having been the one who created it and wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, and then going through the process of publication, and just, you know, all the times that I've revisited it, whether it was like an assembly, school visits, doing readings. And I have to say, though, like, I've had a little bit of a break from it. I did just do book 3, but just in terms of this big gap that happened, probably for like a 6-year window where what really wasn't doing readings, it wasn't revisiting the material, and to come back to it, just to ramp up and just to remember everything in it. And it doesn't, I'm removed now from that process of writing it, that I feel like I'm actually getting to read it as a reader. And it's interesting. There are things that I've forgotten, and there's things that I did that I'm proud of. So there's also things that older, wiser writer would maybe do it a little differently. But, you know, this was a moment in time when this book was created, the series was started, and, you know, we move on from that. I thought what we would do is we'll just cover the first 2 chapters of book 1 and see where the conversation takes us. And if that seems like a pretty good approach, then maybe what we'll do is a couple chapters at a time for each episode until we get to the end. This is, of the 3 books, this is the shortest. It's not very long. I think the hardcover clocks in at around, you know, a little over 200 pages, and the font size is pretty large, and there's pretty ample line spacing. But and in terms of word counts, the first book ended up at about 36,000 words, so not too long for a book. So we'll probably make quick work of this first installment. Chapter 1, just for if you've read it or it's been a minute and you need a refresher, here's sort of the overview of chapter 1. We open with a description of a factory on an island that's pretty grim. The air is toxic. There's a layer of smog, which has blocked out the sunlight for a long time. We hear about the inside of a maze-like factory that is enshrouded in mystery. It makes sludge and seems to be forgotten by humanity. We then meet the bulk of our main characters in the next few pages as well. There's Leonidas Warnock. He's this sort of large, mean, angry man. He seems to hold the highest position at this factory, although it becomes clear he's as much in the dark about this world and the factory's goings-on than anyone else. We meet Stewpot, a friendly oafish character who, along with our title character, seems to be no more than a punching bag for Warnock's misguided rage and ignorance. We hear about creatures called Krillos, which are crow-like and can allegedly drive a person to become insane with their scream alone. I'm reading this first chapter and I'm just like, I knew it was dark, but didn't realize quite how dark it actually is. We learn of a mysterious figure in a cloak who haunts Edgar's dreams and terrifies even Warnock. And then this leads us to our main character, Edgar Trunk, who we learn was orphaned at the age of 1 and left on the steps of the factory and put into Warnock's care. I guess this is the dystopian future version of the baby at the fire station. And where our story begins, time has passed. Edgar is now 10 years old, and despite a miserable life, he is quite a well-balanced kid. Stewpot is his only friend, and he offers Edgar much-needed relief from the dark realities of life in the factory. Stewpot, from time to time, he'll come across a book, and he gifts them to Edgar, and it's a huge beacon of light in Edgar's world. And so we are witnessing this latest find where Stewpot hands over a book that he's discovered, and we don't get the sense that Stewpot can read, but Edgar is a very avid reader, and you can imagine it's quite an escape to be able to have a book when you're in the world as dark and grim as this. But soon after, before Edgar can hardly crack open the book to even read a page, Warnock discovers that he has it, and he takes it away, and it's a very intense encounter, and he's leaving Edgar with nothing once again. Thankfully, Stewpot creates a commotion and diffuses the situation, but we are left with a grim snapshot of Edgar's life as it is now, and as it has been for most of his 10 years. So, chapter 1. Any broad stroke thoughts? Because I have some things.
Well, I first want to say, just every time I've read this book, Uncle Warnock has always been such a fun character to me, because he's this big, brutish, nasty man who loves his cream-filled pastries, and yet he's also super childlike in that he is scared of the factory. He's scared of monsters under his bed. He sleeps with a little baby giraffe, and he you have one sentence in here, which I think just speaks to his own unaware, he doesn't know what's going on in the factory just as much as Edgar doesn't. And he says, you say, he could bend a steel bar into a pretzel, and he could beat any man to a pulp. But once the doors shut, even he was unable to budge them. Speaking to all the doors and the hallways and the corridors that you don't know where they lead. You don't know why they open, why they close. He's just as, oblivious to it all.
Yeah, I mean, the factory is such a mystery, even to, I guess, on the hierarchy of the characters in the story at this point. Warnock is the one in charge. He's the one that everyone fears. He's the one calling the shots. And the mystery is so great that, that we get this visual of this maze-like interior of a factory, but we don't really get to see much of it. What we see are a few rooms, but mostly we see hallways. We see that there are doors to rooms, but they either open and close before you can get in them, or you can't ever open them to begin with. And I love what you said about Warnock. As I was reading this again, yeah, there's so much in his description and his personality that I just thought he's a toddler.
Yes.
He's basically a toddler. And he's so mean and terrifying, and yet there's something really disarming about him. You get the sense that Edgar and Stewpot take him seriously and that they're frightened of him. And at face value, when you really look at the dynamic, and, he's a physically, mentally abusive person. He's terrible. He is the worst kind of villain that you could have. And yet, I don't know. I don't know that we really fear him. You get the sense that he's very low in the pecking order of the lore of this place that is so enshrouded in mystery that, Warnock is just a peon.
Yeah, he is.
I wanted to talk about that for a second. It's very dark. I mean, and yes, the starting age for this series is 8-9 years old. And I think that there is a glaze over the harsh realities of the book, but if you take them at face value as an adult, they're pretty. It's pretty crazy. Okay, for example, this is when this is a sort of expositional moment talking about when Edgar was dropped off at the factory. The quote is, Edgar had just turned 1 year old on the morning he arrived, swaddled in protective clothing. Warnock could have Warnock would have tossed him out with the trash if a note in the boy's shirt hadn't warned against harming him. I mean, I think it's easy to gloss over that, but like imagine like a 1 year old child, and Warnock would have just tossed him out with the trash. I mean
Oh,
that's crazy.
oh yeah. I mean, he even like the little boy toyed with his mind by keeping silent, even when Warnock hit him with a leather cargo strap or forgot to feed him for a few days.
Oh
Like,
my god.
what the? That's dark, Jason.
Oh my gosh, it's so dark. And it's funny because like the line before that one I had marked. Um, let's see, it was kind of I had this quote sandwiched between two quotes that you already shared. This is about Warnock being stronger than any man, but creatures were a different story. Whatever he did, this is talking about Warnock. He had to keep the boy alive and the creatures at bay. He basically there was a note threatening that if Warnock were to allow any harm to befall Edgar, that creatures of his from his worst nightmares would be released upon him. And so this is the thing that Warnock fears above all. And so that is the thing that sort of has put Warnock into shape uh, to the extent that Warnock is, you know, uh, following the rules and all that. But then the story goes on to say, but the task proved difficult because Warnock despised children. They were filthy vermin carriers that managed to break everything valuable and make horrible siren sounds when beaten.
Well, no, duh. I mean, I think
Yeah.
any human would make horrible siren sounds when beaten.
So anyway, this is Warnock. But somehow it's like Warnock's stupidity kind of makes him really humorous, and there is like comedic relief that comes through his character, and just it's how he thinks. Because I don't know that we really know anyone in real life that thinks the way this guy does. At least I hope not. But this is just like a little insight into Warnock's his psyche. This little section. Warnock didn't approve of friendships. In his mind, they were unprofessional and led to such troublesome things as anarchy and happiness.
Yes. Happiness is so evil.
This guy's a piece of work.
And yet we've all worked for someone like him.
You know, there's some truth to that. Like I think a lot of like in the genre, especially, and there a lot of the villains that we see in fantasy or in dystopian or in sci-fi fantasy, they represent characters that we have to deal with in our own lives, and maybe they're dialed up to an extreme, but I think it's like we identify with that. Like, yeah, there are Warnocks in our world, and maybe
Yeah.
not to the extreme of how bad this one is in this story, but we certainly can relate to having an overbearing boss or uncle or parent or teacher, coach, just friend, even neighbor, just that person in your life that they are always right, and yet clearly they don't know too much.
Yep. Yep.
That they only know like abuse, like verbally abusing someone to get their point across, or just like letting things get physical because they don't want to be cross. They don't want to be spoken to. They don't want anyone to kind of like challenge them. They don't want to be challenged. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And I just want to applaud Edgar in all of this. He's grown up with Uncle Warnock for the last 9 years. He's now 10. And he's not like broken by it. He has found time to go and explore these corridors, to create a friendship with Stewpot, to secretly read books that allow him to escape his reality into a new fantasy. And the only world he knows is the Sludge Factory and Uncle Warnock and Stewpot. And he's still resilient. Like, he's still courageous and curious and wants to learn more. which I think is so amazing and beautiful.
Yeah, I really love the character of Edgar. I feel like in this first book, especially, he does have a lot of uh, reactionary moments. You know, I mean, this is the world. This is the hand that's been dealt to him, and he does still have this level of curiosity, and he does have a moral center, and I think the two of those combine to like propel him to make the decisions that he does and to be active and carry the story forward. But in terms of his personality, he's very mild mannered. He doesn't have any big striking personality traits that, like, if you were to put him alternate universe, more normal, more like the world we live in now, put him in a classroom with a bunch of students, I don't know that he would necessarily stand out. But here he is, he's the only kid, and he's living this sort of imprisonment in a way. He's being forced to work. His job is he has to clean these drain covers that are filthy.
And
And
Uncle Warnock won't give him a new brush to do it.
yeah, Uncle Warnock won't even give him tools to do the job better. And you got to give it to Edgar. He wants to do the job well because it's his job. Whatever, you get the sense that he cares. He takes pride but isn't proud. Um, he's just a sweet, like, if you met Edgar, I feel like you'd always want him around. He's just so easygoing, easy to get along with, sweet natured.
Yeah, he is. And he's like any child. He wants to please his caretaker, he wants acknowledgement, he wants to make him proud. Let's talk about this world that you've created, because this is not reality. It is not a world we live in. It is an
Mm.
alternate universe. It is a world where it's, well, one, you call it the most disgusting place on earth,
Hmm.
but it is this island where a factory sits that hasn't seen daylight in over a century, 100 years, no sun.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Well, that is part of the larger mystery. As I got into the next few books, and as I really started to expand on the world, which I'll lump this in with light spoilers. We don't spend the entire series on this island, but it's a pivotal location. It is very much indicative of what the world has become, although not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily represent all of the world at this moment. It certainly is like the extreme and the extent of like the, I guess, damage, if you want to call it. How dark and forgotten that the world can become or has become. This is like the front of the storm. So the world, though, yeah, I mean, I think especially in the first book, you really get a sense of this darkness, and something that was an inspiration for it, and I think which explains why first book the first book really has its own character, because I think the visuals and the creatures that you meet, they are pretty striking, and the first book has its own signature, and I think that you touched on it. It's the world of book one is very unique. And so when I set out to just brainstorm, try to crack the code of what this series was going to be from the very first ideas around a boy trapped in a world where machines were really important, but they'd fallen into the wrong hands. I was looking for something that could be like a kind of prototype for me to help structure my story. And I I didn't come upon, but like this idea that came to me very strongly was what if I took Dante's Inferno, the classic book,
Yeah.
Dante's Inferno, and used it as a sort of template for Edgar's journey through the factory to fully be immersed in its mysteries, and that certainly to a magical degree, there would be various zones, levels, areas of the factory that would all be vastly different in the way that uh, the levels of the Inferno of hell were for Dante, having been led by Virgil through all the circles all the way to the bottom. And I not necessarily thematically drew from that book, but just in terms of like a physical journey, almost in like a video game way. It's like you start at level 1, you're on this circle. You make it to level 2, now it's this circle, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And so initially, I had charted every single chapter was sort of loosely inspired by one of the circles of hell from Dante's Inferno. And I would do like my kid-friendly, non-morality tale version of it, but I was drawing a lot of visuals in those initial outlines. And so the carryover is there are like, I'd say like maybe 5, actually I haven't counted them, but like maybe 5 vastly different areas in this factory that we experience all in the first book. And they do lean into the physical descriptions pretty heavily as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, we get a little glimpse of that in chapter 2, which we'll get to. But how serendipitous that you wrote this book over 10 years ago, way before we were living here at the old Edison Electric Company building built in 1901 that has numerous tunnels upon tunnels, corridors, nooks, crannies, alcoves. We're literally living in the factory. Isn't that weird?
Oh, I mean, having opened up our doors for several years for the art walk that happens here, and having readers new and old come in, yeah, everybody just assumes, oh, your book was inspired by living here in this old, electric company.
Yes. I mean, you just look at the cover of book 1. There is a factory in the background with a big, long smokestack. It is literally the silhouette of the building we live in now.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, I was certainly picturing the industrial age architecturally, and I think that was a big driver for the artists in doing the artwork. But you don't really, we live in Los Angeles, and you don't really have a lot of architecture. You don't really have a lot of industrial architecture. Sure, you have it, but not as much as you might in other areas of the States. Yeah, it's serendipitous for sure. I think too, it's like there's something about when you are drawn to something aesthetically, or when you like something or a certain style, it's gonna find its way into your work as a creative. It's gonna find its way at like the experiences or vacations you might take, or museums you might go to, excursions.
Clothes you'll wear.
Yeah.
Instagram accounts you follow, music you listen to.
Yeah, you're gonna pursue it. And so even though it might be shocking to learn that we didn't live here when I conceived and wrote this story, and now we do, how coincidental is that? I think, it's something that we both obviously are into. And so it makes total sense to me that we would end up in an old industrial building. I mean, how cool.
Oh, we love living here. It's so fun. So one of the other things I want to bring up, one of the other characters that we haven't really dug into, is this cloaked figure. We meet this cloaked figure. They're kind of lurking in the darkness.
Yeah.
We don't know who they are. They haven't spoken. We haven't really gotten a good glimpse of them yet. But there's obviously this like We think, Uncle Warnock is a villain to an extent, but there's a bigger villain out there, and it's this cloaked figure.
Yeah, exactly. You don't get the sense that the evil that has to be overcome, or the villain that has to be overcome, is Warnock, even though he certainly is villainous. Uh, it's funny you're mentioning this now. In the first, let's see, 1, 2, 3 pages. So, and remember, these are pretty sparse. Not a lot of words on a page, but in the first, these are probably the first few hundred words. Even I made note of all the characters that are at least referenced. We've got the Krillos are first, Leonidas Warnock second. Third, we learn there's a reference, and we learn more about it later, but to mechanical workers.
Yeah.
What even is that? Like when I read that, I'm like, and now I know what it is, but if I'm reading it with fresh eyes, I'm like, what is that? Oh my gosh. 4, voices. Voices. They're bodiless, voices that are heard in the hallway, but we don't really see in the characters in the book so far. I've not seen whose voices these are. So are those characters we've introed already, or is this like something new entirely? Stewpot, who we talked about.
Love him.
And then Edgar Trunk, and that I may have stopped counting at that point, but then we get to this sort of cloaked figure that is enshrouded in mystery, and I think I come away from the very first chapter thinking this is a place that's dark and futuristic. It seems like it might be magical. There are certainly creatures as well as humans, and it doesn't seem that there are many people. Right now, the world seems pretty small. You've got Warnock and Stewpot, and then Edgar. That is basically it. That is very small. That is smaller than a lot of families. So I kind of wanted just to go back real quick to just a moment ago when you were talking about world. So the first book, a couple things I want to address. I wrote the first draft of this book when I was 24 years old. I had just moved to Los Angeles. I was not living in a factory. I was living in a small apartment, like most people who move to Los Angeles.
Like Edgar Trunk.
Like Edgar. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like his room was just my bedroom. But I had written several books already that were not published, but I always felt that novel writing was where my trajectory would take me. I then got into screenwriting and then later filmmaking, but just moved to LA. I write this book in 3 weeks. The first draft. I already told you that the final draft ended up being around 36,000 words. My first draft was 56,000 words.
Oh my God.
Probably I haven't done the math, but maybe 40%.
Did you longer. Not eat, not sleep, write on the toilet? How did you write that? How much in 3 weeks?
Well, it's actually not. It is a lot, but clearly having gone from 56,000 words down to 36,000 words, it was, as a first draft can often be, it was overwritten. So, I wasn't stopping to agonize over the next line. I was just getting in the flow. I knew I had my roadmap from where physically we were going to go, because I was playing with the Dante's Inferno vibe. And so I knew I had to hit all these circles, and I had notes on what each of the circles was going to be, but I never really outlined the internal development of the characters. I knew what the themes were, and I knew what Edgar was going to achieve by the end of it, but I was so focused on the external, and that is something that for sure has changed as I've gotten older. But I dug up the initial first couple paragraphs of my very first draft.
Ooh.
And I thought it'd be fun to share.
Yeah.
So I think just for comparison, it's so short. First, I want to read, or do you have your book?
Yeah.
Do you want to read, maybe you'll read, if you read just the first 2 full paragraphs. So it'll take you on to page 2.
Okay. Chapter 1. The most disgusting place on earth. At the edge of the earth, a giant factory billowed soot and ash from its stacks, forever blotting out the sun. The island where the factory sat had not seen daylight in over a century. Instead of a bright blue ocean, a river of sludge oozed around it. Everything colorful had died in the toxic air, and outdoor walks had become fatal. Only the dreaded Krillos, a horrible crow-like creature, thrived among the trunks of dead trees, reason enough not to venture out. The factory was just as gloomy on the inside. A maze of corridors filled the main floor. A dim yellow light illuminated green cobblestone walls and linoleum floors. Lining these halls were hundreds of imposing metal doors, all secured shut. Not even Leonidas Warnock could open them, despite repeated attempts. They opened and closed at will, if you asked him. It was like the place had a mind of its own.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Love hearing your voice reading.
I should be a reoccurring voiceover actor for audible.com.
Good luck. I guess this could be your audition tape. So, okay, that's the current first full chapters of the book. Here are the original 2 chapters. Chapter 1. Edgar Trunk lived in the most disgusting place on earth. It was so disgusting, in fact, that it consumed an entire island. And that island was surrounded by a thick river of charcoal-colored ooze and was known only as Zug Island. The word Zug is not a word that anybody knows. In fact, it probably did not exist as a word until an unknown and mysterious person created the island long ago. Even at its creation, Zug Island was not necessarily known as Zug Island. It may very well have been named Sweet Flowers Island, but ever since the dark and frightening factory was allowed to pollute and congest the air with thick, bloated clouds, and the waters were allowed to absorb the filth and decay left over, becoming vile and thick, the name had come to be Zug Island. You probably get the point. Zug Island was a terribly filthy and disgusting place, and all because of the factory, where poor Edgar made his home.
Wow. Say Zug one more time, please.
Zug.
What a different opening. It's like a history lesson.
Yeah, and there is actually an island, Zug Island.
Like in real life?
Yeah, in real life.
Where is it?
I'm trying to remember. Stumbled upon it. I believe it's in Detroit, or like near Detroit.
Oh, that's just too sad.
I know, but I mean, it literally says Zug Island on a sign, so I was like, Zug Island. That is like the craziest name I've ever.
It's a cool name.
Yeah, it's a cool name. I'm using it.
Did you keep that name?
No. There's no like name for the island.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, what a different opening. Very cool.
So even though like it's different, I still feel like what we take away from the first chapter, like this is consistent with that.
Oh, yeah.
The doom and gloom, and there's sort of this like nod to like the Harry Potters of like the literary sphere.
Yeah.
In that like in one of the final paragraphs of chapter 1. There's sort of this like putting Edgar Trunk in this like he's an anti-Harry Potter in a way. I want to know what you think, but I want to read this is essentially how the first chapter closes out. There's more that happens after this, but
Are we back in the real book?
Back in the real
Okay.
book. So this is like the very end. This is like page 16 out of 17. So let's see. Basically, Edgar is totally defeated. He just got this book. It's been taken away from him. He is being punished, so he's not going to get to eat that night. And here he is alone. And we get the sense that a lot of days have ended like this over the 9 years that he's lived in this factory. And the section is, there was nothing else for him to do. Okay, so this is Edgar, left alone, sat down on the floor and picked up another drain cover that he's going to have to clean. There was nothing else for him to do. He had no special magic he could call upon to save him. There were no mysterious or even imagined friends to steal him away to some paradise. There were no toys and no televisions, no jungle gyms or swings, no candies or cakes. These were for Uncle Warnock only. No mothers or fathers, no stars, and no sun. There was the factory and his life inside it.
I literally highlighted that too. Such a strong passage.
It's dark.
It's dark.
It's like I said Zug a lot. Like, say dark one more time.
It's so dark. It's Jason O. Silva. That's your middle name. Jason O. Dark Silva.
So, first chapter of the book, of the series, and I feel like we learn of this world somewhat magical. There are certainly greater things to fear than what we have so far met, even though Warnock is terrible, and even though life is terrible and the air is toxic, and oh my gosh, this world is not a world that we want to live in. It's not. And it's sort of like, how could this be any other way? This just feels like a planet that is gone.
Yeah, it does.
There's no hope here.
No, it's so dark and it's so gloomy, and you wonder, like, okay, now what?
Right. So the story does have to start somewhere, and this is where it's starting. And so it's taken maybe 9 years of Edgar's 10 years of his life to get through the misery and the doldrums of his life to get to the moment where something different happens or something happens. And we get that something here at the very end of the first chapter, taking us into the second chapter.
Yeah. So now we're into chapter 2, which starts with a very, very loud knock on the door. And Edgar follows that knock and realizes that it's not a normal knock. It's like a knock that you can hear. And as he steps closer to it, it moves away. So he continues to follow this knock all the way down the corridor, all the way through the miles and miles of tunnels and corridors that this factory has, past beyond where he's explored before. And although he's scared that Uncle Warnock's going to discover he's not in his room cleaning, he follows the knocking sound until he finds a little squat door, and he decides he's going to go through it. And when he does, he realizes it's ice cold, and he explores this whole new room that he's never been in before. So once he's in this room, we see a shadow slip down the ceiling and fill the passageway. And now we've met another character in the book. We think.
Yeah, well, we know now because we've read the book. But yeah, I mean, it's you might not think knocking at the door would be very adventurous, but for Edgar, remember the world of the people that populate the number of people that populate his world is so small that a knock, he knows how Warnock knocks, Stewpot knocks. This is somebody new, something new. Maybe it's an entity. Maybe it's not even a person necessarily. But he hears this knock, and he's just like, is everybody else hearing this? Like, this is like loud. This isn't like Amazon knocking on your door. This is like, this is here. This is echoing down hallways. And so he's probably wondering, like, am I hearing this in my head? Nobody's reacting. Like, Stewpot's not out in the halls. Warnock's not out in the halls. Like, what is going on? What is this knock? And there is one blessing to the life that Edgar has lived, which is, there's nights where he can't sleep. There's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there where he finishes his work and Warnock's nowhere to be found. Well, he has spent this time, these little bits of time that over 9 years have added up to a lot of time. He spends that investigating where he lives. I mean, he's bored. What else is he going to do? And he doesn't have any more luck getting into all these rooms than anyone else that we've met so far, but he certainly has sort of mentally mapped out all these corridors and hallways. And so in this investigating, he's also never heard this noise before. So this is something new. And as he tries to like get to the source of like where this knocking is coming from, there's sort of this like weird dialogue. Like if he turns down the wrong corridor, he'll hear a knock from a different direction. It's almost like some weird GPS is like trying to guide him to a thing. And so
It's like warmer, 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 colder, colder.
Totally. And so when he comes upon this like little wooden door, it's so bizarre because Edgar swears he knows every inch of this place that's accessible through the hallways. And here now, not a big metal, like unbreakable, unbreachable door. Like this is like a little wooden door. This is like a door that like an elf would walk through.
Yes, yes. It goes up to his chest, which he's a 9-year-old or 10-year-old boy. So it's small. It's a small, squat door.
Yeah, it's a small squat door. And when he touches the handle, it's frosty, like it's ice cold. So
Yeah.
it's actually, I marked it down. It's actually our first reference, direct reference to something magical in this world. And he finds himself entering this small passage, and the backside of that wooden door is like solid ice. And it doesn't make any sense. It's not like it's melting and there's like a river of water underneath. Like it's never really described, but you know, sludge factory. To me, it seems like this is probably a place that runs hotter than cold.
Yes. Yeah.
So like having ice is pretty unusual.
Yeah, it is. And it's like just this door.
And like ice is so rare, he's only read about it.
Yeah.
He references this book called Cold Hard Things. That's all about ice and snow. And
He also references the Titanic, which is really funny. I'm like, okay, Edgar Trunk's reading Titanic. I love it.
Yeah, there clearly is a link to like our Earth that we know, whether this is Earth or this is like a near Earth like planet. I'm curious what people think.
Oh, and it's also worth mentioning that there was a sign hung above the door that said, "No one shall enter."
Right. I mean, you want to open that door immediately, right?
I don't. But Edgar is the very curious boy seeking answers, I feel like. He wants to learn more. He's very drawn to mystery.
Yeah, I think this is one of those like subtler reveals of what Edgar's motivation might be. And yeah, I love that. He isn't just a prisoner in this world that he finds himself. He is curious. He wants to explore. You know, it's in his nature to, even though he's a good boy, like he finds ways to break the rules. I think if that wasn't a part of Edgar, that he never would follow the knock and the story would never happen. He would just be in his room wondering maybe what that was, but never really finding out.
No, but he's our strong, curious protagonist who is drawn to these goings on in the factory. He has to figure out what it is. Also, I wanted to point out, because we talked about some of the books that Edgar Trunk has read. One of them is called Marge McGinty Crosses Over. And it's about a large girl who's so big she couldn't get to heaven when she died. And so she remained in her home for eternity, left to haunt the empty rooms. Is this a real book?
No, but it'd be pretty awesome.
Oh my God. It sounds like a real book. It sounds like a Lemony Snicket kind of book.
Well, do you want to share the passage?
Yes, I do. It's so Jason. She up and died while eating fruit pie, and quite large was Marge that, The heavenly light gave a good fight, but in the end, she was just too fat.
This would be like a cartoonish level of largeness.
Oh, yeah. No, it reminds me of the book that you got, Sage, about the 12 kids and they each have an ailment. It's like, I think it's Lemony Snicket or it's one of the other dark authors.
Edward Monk.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there's definitely that's another one where people are like, oh, you totally are a fan of Monk, and I'm like, I am now, but it's just I would say like tonally the darkness and where the humor comes out of the darkness. I love that type of humor.
Yes. And I think, as parents, we like that kind of humor because you can only read so many monkeys jumping on the bed books to your child. So you want to read something that's a little bit more entertaining, dark, humorous, and that's definitely the book that you bought for our son Sage. And it's absolutely what you wrote here. It's the same exact writing style.
Well, you spend so much time reading all these books, watching all these shows with your kids that you want to enjoy them too.
Yeah.
So I think that's like why some of the Pixar movies are so great. I love the books that are Lemony Snicket, A Series of Fortunate Events is a lot advanced for our son now, but like the Gazler Crumb Tinies, it's sort of accessible to toddlers because of the visuals, but there's that deeper level of just dark humor that makes it enjoyable for parents too. I love that.
And I think it's why so many parents and teachers are drawn to the Tale of Edgar Trunk. People that we've met who we've sold the book to are like, I love this space. And there's not enough of this space in the children's space.
Oh, well, just think about what we've read and talked about just in chapter 1 alone with Warnock. I mean,
it's dark.
It's so dark. It would get censored out.
It would.
I've often gotten the note when working with editors, the two notes that have stood out to me. One, this is too dark. And two, that word's too big. And this is where it gets personal for me. Growing up, fantasy, it started with fantasy. It expanded well beyond that. But, and I have come back to fantasy lately. But for me, it started with fantasy. And I love the dark and like Goosebumps and scary stories to tell in the dark. I mean,
yeah,
those are like frightening. Those stories are frightening. Like they're frightening to adults.
Oh, yeah. I can't even read them as a 33-year-old.
So I always gravitated toward the really dark material. It was what got my curiosity going. Like it got my creativity just like, really, really, really engaged. And that word's too big. Well, I often was remarked, it was often remarked by teachers and fellow students that I had a big vocabulary, especially as a kid. I think as adults, we don't necessarily make that comment as much. And I think also like I'm sort of more aware of big words when I'm talking, just because why flex a big word? It just feels like a flex, but
innocuous.
When you're talking, yeah, it's more casual, but in writing, I learned so many words that I didn't know, and the only reason I learned them was because I was exposed to them. And I just feel like there is this level of censorship where it's like adults determining what kids can be exposed to. Now, certain content I totally understand, but like that word's too big. No, context clues, like they'll figure it out. Like the more I certainly read words I didn't know what they were when I read them the first few times, and I wasn't necessarily going to look them up. Sometimes I did, but the more you see them, the more you go, oh, I kind of get a sense of what that word means. You now learn that word.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that expanding one's vocabulary is a lost art, And I don't know, is that even taught as much in school anymore? We'll find out.
I don't know, but I would say like we just don't give kids enough credit. Like they are smart little beings and they can read a word and they can put together the context and they can figure it out.
I
And
think
then one day when they're an adult like me, they'll say that word out loud and someone will correct them on the pronunciation and they'll know. I know the word, but I don't even know how to say it.
oh my gosh, there's so many words that I knew it from reading it, but didn't know how it was pronounced. And so therefore was just guessing at the pronunciation. Yeah, I think kids are, and especially like the middle grade, the sort of middle school age, which is the target of the series, they're so emotionally dialed in that all the emotional tension, the emotional subtext of stories, they are completely dialed into that. And it's instinctual. It's not analysis, standing back, talking about it, realizing it among, through conversation with their peers. That's just that's what I connected to as a kid. And that's what kids connect to. And it's easy to forget how much more open and vulnerable we are as readers when we're younger. It's so much, we don't have any cynicism preventing us to, get the access to the stories that feels personal, which I think is what can make books so magical when that
Yeah.
happens.
And also to the vocabulary of it all. Like, what a great way to connect with your kid or with your parent. Like, you look to your mom and you're like, Mom, what does exorbitant mean? Like, what is that? And now your mom has, or your dad, or whoever has the opportunity to like explain and teach you something. And now it's like this connecting moment where your book is allowing kids and their caretakers to talk about something and learn. And I think that's so cool. I still do that with you. I'm like reading a book and I'm like, what is this word? And you're like, well, it means this. And you always know. And it's so cool.
But if I didn't know or I don't know, then it's always fun to look up, and because sometimes there's words you use, but then when you're asked to define it, it's almost impossible.
Yes.
Because it's like, no, it's just something I use. I don't know how to describe it,
Yeah.
or define it. And sometimes you go from like confident to insecure real quick on a word when someone asks you to define it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just how it goes. There's so many words in the language, but it's just fun to look up. I mean, how many dictionaries do we have?
Oh, many. We have big ones, little ones, red ones, blue ones.
Yeah, it's so excited to when Sage is a little bit older to like get him like make that part of the reading process, like have a dictionary on hand, and when we come across a word that he doesn't know, like let him look it up. And yeah, you could Google it, but there's just so much more like in-depth information when you look at a dictionary and the usages of, over time in sentences. And yeah, it can be really fun, a really great teaching moment, but also like really great learning moment as a parent as well. Just going over those words again, with a different lens.
The beauty of literature.
So anyway, just want to bring it back to the end of chapter 2. We do get this dark, mysterious shadow. It's whispering Edgar's name with a sort of hiss, and it clearly is following Edgar down this passage that he has entered through this mysterious little wooden elf door. It's not an elf door, but just so you get the visual, I'll say elf door. And that has the ice on the back. And things are different now. Edgar has discovered something new he didn't know was there. At least to us, an evil has made itself known. And we'll have to find out in the following chapters where it goes.
I'm excited. That's a good boy. That's what the shadow whispers to him.
That's not what Annette just says to me when I do something good.
But now I'm going to.
Oh my God. Well, thanks for listening. This is the very first episode of our Reread podcast. Our goal is to take on the series starting from page 1, a few chapters at a time, and dig in. So if you like what you heard, please like and subscribe, comment, tell us what you'd like more of, less of. If you have questions, please comment your question or reach out to us, and we'd be happy to tackle those. But I think it went pretty well.
Yeah.
It was fun.
This was fun. We went on all these little talking journeys that I wasn't even expecting.
Same.
It was fun.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.